In a cave in the mountains of the Republic of Georgia, on a crumb of dried clay no bigger than your thumbnail, there are threads. How much of the ancient world was spun, dyed, and beautiful, and simply crumbled into nothing before anyone alive could ever see it? Tiny, twisted threads, spun by a human hand out of wild plant fiber, twisted so that weak, useless strands became something strong enough to knot, to tie, to carry weight. That alone would be remarkable. But when scientists looked closer, they found something that stops you cold. Some of those threads had been dyed, turquoise, pink, black, which means a person, more than 30,000 years ago, held a bundle of plant fiber in their hands and decided it ought to have a color. Whatever they made from it is long gone, because cloth rots. It always rots. It rots almost the instant you stop looking at it. So we are left holding a few stained threads and one deeply unsettling question. When you think about weaving, you probably think of something slow and quaint. A grandmother at a loom. A museum diorama with a mannequin and a basket. A craft. The kind of gentle thing people took up once the hard business of survival was finished. Once we had farms and villages and time to spare. We file cloth under the heading of civilization. Something that arrived after agriculture. After we settled down, a comfort and a finishing touch. That instinct is not just slightly off, it is wrong by 20,000 years. The thread in that Georgian cave was spun in the depths of the last ice age, with mammoths still walking the landscape, glaciers grinding across the north, and not one single farm anywhere on planet Earth. Weaving did not arrive after civilization. It was already there, fully formed, waiting, long before. The cave is called Dzudzuana, tucked into the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains. In 2009, a team led by the Georgian scientist Eliso Kvavadze published their findings in the journal Science, and the numbers are staggering. They recovered at least 488 fibers of wild flax, clinging to sediment in cave layers that radiocarbon dating places between roughly 26,000 and 34,000 years old. These were not raw plants that had blown in. The fibers had been spun, twisted deliberately into thread. Some were knotted, and a number of them carried traces of color: black, gray, turquoise, pigments that do not appear by accident, which tells us someone was dyeing them. Dyeing is not a simple thing. It means gathering the right plants or minerals, preparing them, and fixing the color into the fiber so it actually holds. A small chain of chemistry that somebody had already worked out in the depths of an ice age. Kvavadze and her colleagues, including the Harvard archaeologist Ofer Bar Yosef, argued these were cords for binding stone tools to handles, for stitching hides into clothing, for weaving baskets. The ordinary working thread of an Ice Age household, 30,000 years before the first loom you would recognize. But a single cave could be a fluke, a freak of preservation, so travel about 2,000 kilometers northwest to a pair of sites in the Czech Republic named Pavlov and Dolní Věstonice. There, the evidence of weaving survives in one of the strangest forms imaginable. As impressions baked into clay. Around 26 to 27,000 years ago, people at these camps were working with wet clay near their fires, and pieces of woven material, mats and baskets and textiles, pressed against that clay and left their pattern behind before it hardened. In 1993, the archaeologists Olga Sofer of the University of Illinois and James Adovasio began recognizing those imprints for what they really were. Under magnification, Adovasio picked out the unmistakable interlace structure of true weaving. At least 2 different weave patterns, some of it fine enough to sit beside modern cloth without embarrassment. They published the Pavlov finds in the journal Antiquity in 1996. The fabric itself had vanished 26,000 years ago. Its fingerprint, pressed into a bit of clay, outlived it. Now the picture gets richer, because those same researchers noticed the cloth showing up somewhere nobody had thought to look, on the bodies of tiny carved statues. You have almost certainly seen the so-called Venus figurines, small Ice Age carvings of women, some of them tens of thousands of years old. For a century, scholars looked at them and saw nude bodies. But when Sofer, Adovasio, and Dominique Hyland studied them closely, in a paper published in Current Anthropology in the year 2000, they saw clothing, rendered in obsessive detail. Woven caps, hairnets, belts, and on the Venus of Lespugue, a roughly 25,000-year-old figurine from France, a string skirt, with every individual twist of the fibers so carefully carved that a modern weaver can look at it and tell you precisely how it was made. Someone did not just weave these textiles, they were proud enough of them to immortalize them in stone. Now, this reading is genuinely debated. Some archaeologists think those carvings show hairstyles or pure decoration, not fabric. But if Soffer is right, Ice Age weaving was not crude at all. It was detailed enough to be worth showing off. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. The thread might be older than our species. At a rock shelter in southern France called Abri du Marat, a team led by the archaeologist Bruce Hardy found a fragment of cord just 6 millimeters long, stuck to the surface of a stone tool. They published it in the journal Scientific Reports in 2020. Under the microscope, it was not a single strand. It was 3 separate bundles of bark fiber, each one twisted in one direction, then all 3 twisted together in the other. A 3-ply cord, built on exactly the same engineering principle as the rope in your garage today. And the tool it clung to was made by Neanderthals, somewhere between 41,000 and 52,000 years ago. That is not us. Twisting a cord like that means understanding how fiber can be made to hold against itself, and keeping track of your strands and plies, a grasp of pairs and numbers we used to assume Neanderthals simply did not have. The oldest thread ever found may not have been spun by a human being at all. Follow the thread across an ocean and forward in time, and it surfaces on a completely different continent. High in the Peruvian Andes, in a cave called Guitarrero, archaeologists working in the 1960s found woven textiles and knotted cords. For decades, nobody could pin down how old they were. Then, in 2011, the archaeologist Edward Joly, then at Mercyhurst College, and his colleagues applied precise radiocarbon dating and published the answer in Current Anthropology. The textiles were between about 11,000 and 12,100 years old, the oldest fabric in all of South America. Finely woven fragments, more than 50 separate lengths of cordage, made by some of the very first human beings ever to climb into and settle the high Andes. The cave sat high and dry enough that the fibers never fully rotted, which is the only reason we have them at all. The pieces look to have been parts of bags, baskets, and wrappings, the humble containers that let people carry food and belongings through a brutal mountain landscape. Wherever people went, the thread went with them. By the time farming finally arrives, weaving is so deeply established that it is already full of surprises. At Çatalhöyük, a 9,000-year-old town in what is now Turkey, actual cloth survived, scorched and preserved when a building burned down. For years, everyone assumed it was linen, made from flax, or possibly wool. But in 2021, the textile specialist Antoinette Rast-Eicher and her colleagues examined the fibers under a microscope and published a genuine shock in the journal Antiquity. The cloth, around 8,500 to 8,700 years old, was not flax or wool at all. It was made from the bast fiber of oak trees, the tough stringy layer just under the bark. This was some of the oldest actual woven cloth on Earth, and the people who made it were not cultivating flax for the purpose. They were stripping fiber straight out of the trees standing around their houses. Here is a detail that clinches the whole thing. The tools. Across Neolithic Europe and the Near East, once people had settled into villages, archaeologists start finding little perforated clay weights by the dozen, loom weights, used to hold bundles of thread taut on an upright loom, turning up alongside spindle whorls, the small clay flywheels that let you spin fiber into thread quickly and evenly. Some of the earliest, from sites in the Balkans and Hungary, reach back more than 6,000 years, occasionally found lying in a neat row where a loom once leaned against a wall. But those fired clay weights are only the hard, surviving skeleton of a craft that was already unimaginably ancient by the time anyone made them. The loom is Neolithic, the weaving is Paleolithic. The tools we can actually hold in our hands are tens of thousands of years younger than the skill they were built to serve. So here is the reframe. We are taught a tidy little sequence. First humans farmed, then they settled into towns, and then civilization finally gave them the leisure to invent nice things like cloth. But the thread tells the story backwards. Spun, dyed fiber existed at Zudzuana 30,000 years ago. Woven fabric was pressing into clay at Pavlov 26,000 years ago. It was carved onto figurines, twisted by Neanderthal hands, carried up into the Andes, all of it thousands upon thousands of years before anyone pushed a single seed of wheat into the ground. There was an entire Ice Age textile industry: spinning, dyeing, weaving, net-making, basketry, a whole technology that the textile archaeologist Elizabeth Wayland Barber calls the String Revolution, and which she argues was run largely by women. She makes the case that it may have mattered as much as fire, or the stone blade, for letting our species spread across the planet. Nets to catch fish and birds, cords to lash together shelters, bags and slings to carry food, tools, and infants across enormous distances. That is not a footnote to civilization. That is one of its foundations, and we very nearly missed all of it, for one brutally simple reason. Cloth rots. A stone tool can last 1,000,000 years. A woven bag lasts a season. So the archaeological record is wildly, deceptively biased toward the hard and the sharp, and almost completely blind to the soft. We built the entire story of human progress out of the things that happen not to decay. Line it up one final time. 34,000 years ago in Georgia, thread spun from wild flax and dyed turquoise and pink. 26,000 years ago in Moravia, woven cloth fossilized as impressions in fired clay. 25,000 years ago, string skirts carved onto figurines in France. As much as 50,000 years ago, a 3-ply cord twisted by Neanderthals. 12,000 years ago, fabric high in the Peruvian Andes. 9,000 years ago in Turkey, cloth woven from the bark of oak trees. 6 sites, 3 continents, tens of thousands of years, and every last scrap of it older than the plow. So look down at whatever you are wearing right now. A shirt, a sleeve, a seam, a cuff. Every single thread in it is the direct descendant of a technology that is at least 30,000 years old, and very possibly far older. A trick some Ice Age genius worked out by twisting weak fibers into strong ones, and then dyeing them turquoise and pink, because plain thread was not quite good enough. You are not wearing a modern invention. You are wearing the oldest craft we have, one so ordinary and so perishable that it nearly vanished from history altogether, kept alive in the record only because a few colored threads happened to cling to a lump of clay in a cave in the mountains. The next time you pull on a sweater, remember what it really is. You are wrapping yourself in the Ice Age. All the research is linked in the description.